Well, when I was a student here at Texas A&M, my friends and I decided to try out for this specific organization, and I will never forget the tryout process. My friends and I, we showed up to these events, and the members in this particular organization would spread out all across the room, and then about 200 guys who were all competing for about 30 to 40 spots would make a mad dash to get in line to talk to these different members. And so at any given point, you could look around the room and you would see 3 to 5 guys lined up to talk to each of the different members. And because this organization was so selective, it automatically made all the other guys trying out my competition. I mean, even the friends I went with, it was like in the car, I was like, guys, just to be clear, I love you, but every man for himself. All right. See you on the flip side. And so it wasn't abnormal to find yourself waiting in line more than you actually talked to a member during these different events. And so I will never forget standing in line, waiting to talk to one of these members and just looking around at my different competition. And as I looked at the different competition in the room, I couldn't help but begin to compare myself with the competition in the room. So it was kind of like, okay, well, that guy's clearly a dork, so I'll get him before he does. Okay, that guy's jacked, and from what I can tell, he's good looking, and so he'll get him before I do, so that's how that's gonna go. And that guy just talked to that member for about 30 minutes, but my conversation with the same member kind of concluded in 5 minutes, so that can't be a good sign. And then my friends and I would get in the car afterward and we would just debrief and we would go around and be like, okay, well, how many guys did you talk to tonight? How'd your conversations go? Did you see that guy? That guy's definitely getting in. What do you think your chances are? And after the events concluded, I will never forget making my way over to the MSC to pick up a sealed envelope that would tell me whether I got into the organization or not. I went to pick up this sealed envelope, like I still have it to this day. I don't know what the psychology is behind that. You can assess it for yourself. You can diagnose my problem. I don't know. But this is the exact envelope that I went to pick up from the MSC, and I opened up this envelope, and I'll spare you some of the different fluff in the letter, but the most important line of the entire letter was simply this. We want to inform you that you have not been selected. And I'll never forget getting this letter. And as I read this letter for myself, I looked up and I saw that one of my other friends had just gotten his letter. And I watched his reaction as he read his letter. And as he read his letter, I will never forget him closing his eyes and just smiling because he had gotten in. And as I saw that, I thought to myself, of course he got in. Of course he got in. He's more likable than I am. He's more connected than I am. He has something that I don't. He was enough for them and I wasn't. Tonight I want to talk about this idea of our enoughness. Do you know what it's like to feel like you are not enough for someone or something? Maybe it has felt like there's been different times in your life where someone has handed you a letter in some way. Maybe it's a parent or a student organization or an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend or some place where you wanted to work. Maybe it has felt as if they've handed you a letter informing you you are not enough. Back in the fall, we spent a night talking about suicide. Many of you were there that night. And at the conclusion of that talk, we had a response time where we put pieces of paper under students' chairs and we asked students to pull out those pieces of paper and to write on them a lie that they have been believing. And then they could bring it down and drop it into a bin. The next day, the Breakaway staff gathered up those responses and we just spent time reading through them together. And the fascinating thing was that on the majority of the pieces of paper that we read through, on the majority of paper was the same word, and it was the one word, enough. The majority of people that night were responding saying, I know what it feels like to not be enough for someone else. And that response time actually birthed this series that we are beginning tonight. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to be doing a series that we are calling Enough with Being Enough. Enough with Being Enough. In each week of the series, we're going to look at a force that's at play in each of our lives that questions our enoughness. So like next week, we're going to talk about conformity, this idea that you need to be who someone else wants you to be in order for you to be enough for them. The third week, we're going to talk about compromise, and we're going to look at our past compromising decisions that breed shame in our lives, making us feel like we are never enough. But tonight it starts with a conversation about comparison. I believe that comparison for us is a lot like breathing. We do it instinctively, like we don't have to think to do it, we just do it. And the scary thing is that comparison can be very dangerous because the overflow of comparison into our lives is often insecurity, low self-esteem, low self-worth, anxiety, depression, and even suicide. It is not an exaggeration to say that comparison can ruin your life. If you don't believe me, all you have to do is open up the Holy Scriptures and look at the life of King Saul in the Old Testament. But there's a better way. There's a better way, and that's the whole goal of this 3-week series. We want to fight for joy. We want to get to a place where we can declare with confidence, enough with being enough. And tonight it's going to start with us moving forward together to a point where we can say, enough with the comparison. Enough with comparison. So if you have a Bible, I want to invite you to join me in 1 Samuel chapter 18. 1 Samuel chapter 18, and as we journey through the life of King Saul, what I'm going to give you 4 key realities you need to know regarding comparison. And the hope is this, that as we look at the life of King Saul and as we process through these 4 key realities, my hope is that something would stir inside of your heart that would prompt you to declare enough. So here we go, 1 Samuel chapter 18. Before I start reading, let me just kind of get us all on the same page. We're looking at a passage in the Old Testament of the Bible. The Old Testament revolves around the nation of Israel. King Saul was the first ever king of the nation of Israel. And what you need to know is he was really a mediocre king. And so God promised King Saul that he would one day replace him with a better king. We know that that king ended up being this shepherd boy named David. Now, the story that happens right before the story we're about to read is the famous story known as David and Goliath, where this little shepherd boy David shows up with a sling and a stone, and he drops a giant named Goliath on behalf of the nation of Israel. And that brings us up to where we now read. So join me, 1 Samuel 18, starting in verse 6. I'm going to read you about 10 verses, and what I want you to do is I want you to open your eyes and try and see where comparison steps in, because comparison is going to be the match that lights Saul's life on fire and burns it to the ground. So here we go. Verse 6, it says this, as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated. Here's the comparison. Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. That's someone else putting the comparison on Saul, but now Saul compares himself. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. Watch his life unravel. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul. He raved within his house while David was playing the lyre. And as he did day by day, Saul had his spear in his hand. And Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. Isn't it interesting that a king who had power, wealth, and prestige struggled with comparison? Isn't that interesting? And if a king could struggle with comparison, don't you think it's possible that you too might struggle with comparison? The other night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to our home security alarm going off. And when our alarm went off at 2 a.m, I shot out of bed and I stood there for a split second just in a daze because I was still asleep. And the question that I had to answer in that moment is, did someone just break into my house? And the reason that I tell you that is because of what Theodore Roosevelt says about comparison. Look at what he says. He says this: comparison is the thief of joy. If comparison is a thief, then the question that you need to answer tonight is, has comparison broken into the house of your soul to steal your joy? I believe that the answer to this question is easy. That's why the first key reality that you need to know regarding comparison is this: wake up, you're getting robbed. That's it. Wake up, you're getting robbed. Every single person here struggles with comparison. Comparison is a problem for all of us. I mean, just think, do you ever compare numbers of followers on Instagram? Do you ever compare relationship status or post-college plans? What about number of date party shirts or invitations to crush parties? What about likability? Do you ever compare how outgoing, social, confident, or adventurous someone else is compared to you? What about looks? Do you ever compare hair, makeup, or clothes? What about how in shape you are compared to someone else? What about performance in school or acceptance into various student organizations? What about perceived godliness? We all struggle with comparison. It is a problem for all of us. So listen to this, and please don't miss this. If comparison has broken into the house of each of our souls, then probably something healthy for each of us to do is to identify who, what, and when. Let me explain it this way. Yesterday morning, I got onto Apple's website looking for an opportunity to compare. So let me just show you how things played out, okay? I logged onto Apple's website, went to apple.com, there we go. Apple.com, and what I wanted to compare was the different iPhones. And so I went up and I clicked on the iPhone tab. And lucky for me, right over here on the far right was a tab labeled Compare. That's great because I was looking for an opportunity to compare. So I hit Compare. And the good news is it redirected me to a page that offers me a side-by-side comparison of all the different iPhone models and their different features. The reason I show you this is because I want to ask you a question. If we could somehow click on a tab of your life labeled Compare, I wonder what we would see. Who would be on your side-by-side comparison to your life? And what features would you be comparing? Identify the who and the what. It's different for everyone here, but who do you naturally compare yourself to? Maybe it's one of your roommates. Maybe it's one of your siblings. Maybe it's a specific friend. Maybe it's different people that you see at the gym. It might be someone whose name you don't even know, and they don't even know that you exist. But somehow y'all intersect on a regular basis because y'all have the same schedules, and somehow they've made it onto your chart. Who do you tend to compare yourself to? And what are you comparing? What's valuable to you? Is it looks? Is it attractiveness? Is it your weight? Is it your size? Is it attention you get from people of the opposite sex. Maybe it's relationship status or acceptance into student organizations or involvement in them. Maybe it's summer plans. What is it for you? Identify the who and the what. Now, I will identify the when for you. Let's just all get real. For the majority of us, social media is the first thing we check in the morning. It's the first thing we see. And for the majority of us, social media is the last thing we see before we go to sleep at night. So if social media is the bookends of the majority of our days, then I have to believe that social media might play a role all throughout our days. And what you need to know is social media is the greatest cause of comparison among your generation. So to ask the question, when do you compare? The answer is probably constantly. The first key reality you need to know regarding comparison is this: wake up. You are getting robbed. The second key reality that you need to know regarding comparison is this: comparison feeds on and as, okay? Stick with me, I'll explain it if you're like, huh? Yeah, get it. Okay, comparison feeds on and as. Look back at 1 Samuel 18 with me. Let me read you again verses 6 through 8. It says this. It says, as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000, and to me they have ascribed thousands, and what more can he have but the kingdom? Okay, so follow me on this. Women from all the cities in Israel come out singing and dancing for who? King Saul. Women come out playing tambourines for who? King Saul. Men, let me ask you, when was the last time a woman played the tambourine for you? Probably never. Why? Because you're not important enough for a woman to play the tambourine for you. But Saul was. He was significant. He was great. And the women even come out singing a song in which they declare that Saul has struck down his thousands. What are they declaring? Saul is a conquering king. But there's a problem. What's the problem? Saul has struck down his thousands. David has struck down his 10,000s. Saul compared the praise he received to the praise that David received, and it was the beginning of the end for Saul. Why? This is so important here. The reason this was the beginning of the end for Saul was because Saul didn't want to just be great. Saul wanted to be greater. Philosopher and psychologist John Dewey once said this. Look at what he said. He said, the deepest urge in human nature is the desire to feel important. That's a desire that I think is in each of us. You know how this desire often gets fleshed out in our lives? It's by this longing that Pastor Andy Stanley has identified as the factor. There's something in many of us that longs to know that we are smarter, stronger, prettier, skinnier, funnier, wealthier, godlier, successful than the people around us. We long for the factor. Comparison feeds on I'll never forget this time that I was at the gym running on the treadmill. And as I was running, I didn't hear an audible voice, but God absolutely spoke clearly to me. And you know what he told me in that moment? He said, you need everyone around you to be a nobody so that you can feel like a somebody. Do you know what he was telling me? He was basically saying you need everyone around you to fail so that you can feel like a success. That was the factor getting fleshed out in my life. Is the factor at play in you? Do you need to know that you have the factor over people around you? Maybe you're sitting there saying, I don't think so. Maybe it's not the factor that you long for. Maybe you long for the as factor. Remember I said that comparison feeds on and as. See, maybe you look around at the world and you decide in your own mind by looking around, what is the ideal in this world? And there's this deep insecurity in you that you don't measure up to whatever the ideal is. And so something in you longs for the as factor. If I could just be as pretty, if I could just be as skinny, as smart, as strong, as funny, as likable, as successful, as godly, as the ideal, then I would be satisfied. Let me just tell you one problem with the factor and one problem with the as factor. The problem with the factor is that no matter how many people in this world you have the factor over, you will always come across someone who has the factor over you. And when you do, it's going to provoke insecurity and it's going to lead to exhaustion because you will spend all of your time and energy trying to measure up. The problem with the as factor is that perfection is an illusion. The thing that we think is ideal, we believe that's perfection. Perfection is an illusion. Perception is not reality. Can we just all agree here that Instagram is not reality? There's nothing instant about Instagram. We all need time to crop and to filter and to color correct our pictures. That's why people feel a need to put #NoFilter sometimes. Because anything that appears to be perfect on Instagram is assumed to be doctored. It's not reality, but here's the interesting thing. We look at our unfiltered life and compare it to our filtered feed. One pastor put it this way: when we compare our lives to others, what we're doing is we're comparing the behind the scenes of our lives with the highlight reel of someone else's life. Let me just illustrate it this way. I'm going to ask the cameras to zoom in as much as they can. This right here is the Atik family Christmas card from 2017. Okay, just look at that. I mean, just look at. Oh, it doesn't stop there. Bam! Look at that perfect family. I mean, clearly, Kat and I right here, we're a smoking hot couple, crushing our mid to late 30s, by the way. Struggling to keep this on the screen. This right here, that's Noah. He's a stud dominating the second grade. This is Andrew. He is the man just knocking kindergarten out of the park. And then on the back, that's baby Jake right there. And baby Jake is, we believe, just days away from a baby modeling contract. This is a perfect family, folks. Look at those smiles. Everyone is happy. Everyone is happy. It's a perfect family. Now, do you want to know what was going on surrounding these pictures being taken? Let me just tell you real quick. We were taking those pictures over close to Research Park in 30-mile-an-hour winds. Do you know how difficult it is to keep kids' hair straight in 30-mile-an-hour winds? And man, I was on my kids that day. It was like, get up off the ground, stop rolling around, get out of the brush, stop jacking around with each other, stop running away, sit still, keep your hands still, stop moving, look at the camera, smile, stop tilting your head in a weird way. And then on the back end of taking those pictures, because it was 30-mile-an-hour winds, something blew into my 2.5-month-old baby's eye, and it scratched his eye, so we had to take a $1,000 visit to the ER. Now, the good news is that we're about halfway through getting our Christmas cards out to everyone. So some people will finally hear Merry Christmas from the Teague family about mid-February. What's my point? Perfection is an illusion. Have you ever thought that the people who are living the ideal life in your imagination might be living a far from perfect life in reality? Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought that the people who you believe have everything still feel like they're lacking something? Have you ever thought that they might be comparing themselves to other people, longing for the as factor in their own life? You have to understand, comparison feeds on and as. The third key reality you need to know regarding comparison is this. Comparison has terrible side effects. Comparison has terrible side effects. You know those drug commercials where at the end of the commercial there's this soft, soothing voice that comes on and tells you the side effect of the drug? You know, it's these videos of these people like all smiling, playing with their pets, and then there's that one where there's two people like sitting in bathtubs on a beach. And you're like, how did you get those bathtubs on the beach? Like, did y'all bring your own bathtubs? Did you just stumble upon those? Did you disinfect them if you just found them? And then this voice comes on that's like, talk to your doctor before using this drug. Using this drug could cause nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, demon possession, or death. What's the point? That's so dumb. What's the point? The point is that no matter how good the drug is, there will always be side effects. And what you need to know is comparison has terrible side effects. If you don't believe me, all you have to do is look at how Saul's life played out. In 1 Samuel 18, verse 8, comparison fueled anger. In verse 9, comparison led to suspicion and paranoia. In verse 12, comparison caused fear. If you were to keep reading, comparison led Saul to spend the rest of his life trying to kill David. Trying to kill David. And it caused him to lose the respect of his daughter, his son, and all of his men. Ultimately, Saul ended up committing suicide. Comparison produced terrible side effects in Saul's life, and it will do the same for you. Let me just tell you, if you give in to comparison, here's what you can expect to see manifested in your life. Number one, competition. Comparison fuels competition and starves connection. It ruins relationships. Number two, pride. You'll look for people that you are better than so that you can feel better about yourself. Next, envy. You'll wish you had a little less of what God has given you and a little bit more of what He has given to someone else. It'll provoke anxiety because you will consistently feel like you're not doing enough. It'll lead to exhaustion because you will actually never be able to do enough. It'll lead to resentment. You'll resent other people's successes because you believe that their success makes you a failure. And you'll resent God for not giving you more of what others have. It'll lead to unhealthy gratification. You will inwardly celebrate people's failures because it will make you feel more like a success. And last, it'll produce dishonesty. You'll live a lie. It's called smiling depression. In an attempt to measure up, you'll act happy and self-assured even when in reality you are sad and stressed out. If you are exhibiting any of these symptoms right now, please see my first point. Wake up. You are getting robbed. The last key reality that you need to know regarding comparison is this. The cross of Christ does what comparison can't. I just want to take a minute and tell you that this talk tonight is very personal to me. It's very personal to me. Almost 2 years ago, I sat at breakfast with former director of Breakaway, Ben Stewart, and we sat at the Hilton over on University. And at that breakfast, Ben told me, he said, hey man, here's the deal. I'm leaving Breakaway. I'm going to Passion City Church, and I want you to become the next director of Breakaway. Now, you have to understand, when I was at A&M, Breakaway was my favorite part of my college experience. So to have the opportunity to come back to Aggieland and lead the ministry that helped shape my spiritual life was a dream opportunity. And that was a really sweet time, and there was a lot of people that were excited for us. But it also awakened this socially awkward gene in a lot of people. And people began to say really socially awkward things to me. Like, for example, I was speaking at this event in Austin, and I had just poured my heart out, given it my all, given this talk. And right as I stepped down off the stage, this guy comes up to me, introduces himself to me, and he says, so you're taking over Breakaway? Ben Stewart is an amazing speaker. And I was like, that is a true statement. Like, I don't know how to respond. Like, Ben's not here right now. Can I take a message? What am I supposed to say to that? I agree completely. I will let him know. I was speaking at another event, and this guy came up to me and was like, you're taking over Breakaway? Man, you have big shoes to fill. I heard that from multiple people. Man, you have big shoes to fill. Another person, man, is it difficult taking over after Ben Stewart? There's socially awkward things to say. And then I heard that some students decided that they couldn't come back to Breakaway because it was different now and it wasn't as cool anymore. And it put me in this really weird place because Ben is one of my good friends. And I believe that Ben Stewart is one of, if not the best communicator in the nation. And Ben is someone that I have looked up to and learned from for years now. But comparison broke into the house of my soul. And it stole my joy. And it started to cause insecurity in me and feelings of insufficiency in me. And you know what else it did? It started to cause resentment in me towards Ben's success, because I began to believe that Ben's success indicated my failure. And then there were some Tuesday nights which turned into what felt like an audition in front of the people in the crowd, me stepping on stage, wondering if I would be enough for the people in the crowd, knowing that they were comparing me to Ben. But something's different now. Something's changed. Ben and I are closer than ever. Ben Stewart is actually one of the greatest voices of wisdom that I have in my life today. We talk frequently. I'm more confident in ministry now than ever because I've realized that God hasn't asked me to fill Ben's shoes. As far as I know, Ben took all of his shoes to DC with him anyway. But he hasn't asked me to fill Ben's shoes. He hasn't asked me to be Ben 2.0. He's just asked me to be faithfully me. And you know what that's done? It's freed me up to celebrate. So I celebrate how God's using Ben. That's why I had Ben come speak in the fall. That's why when I went to Passion, I went to DC to celebrate what God is doing through Ben. Because a win for Ben is a win for the kingdom, which is a win for me. You know what changed things? I think I began to learn, and I think I'm still learning, that the cross of Jesus Christ does what comparison can't. See, the cross of Jesus Christ declares and cements my value. So follow me on this. This is so important. Please don't miss this. If you're getting robbed, if you want to reclaim some of your joy, then what you have to ask is, why do I compare? That's the real question tonight. Why do you compare? The good news is that there's a psychologist, Leon Festinger. He popularized what's known as the social comparison theory in 1954. And here's what he tells us. He says, we determine our own social and personal worth based on how we stack up against others. Do you hear what he's saying? He's telling us the why. Here's why we compare. We compare to determine how much we are worth in this world. We compare ourselves to others because we're trying to answer the question, how valuable am I? So if you have the Irv factor over other people in your life, you're worth a lot more. You're a lot more valuable. If other people have the Irv factor over you, you're worth less. If you have the as factor in your life, that at least means you're as valuable as someone else. Do you see how this works? You know what the hard thing is? The problem is that what this world values is constantly changing. And because what this world values is constantly changing, that means your value is constantly changing. Unless you look somewhere else to determine your value. You have to make a choice. If you're ready to say enough with comparison, then you come to the cross of Christ because it declares and cements your value. Listen to what Peter said in 1 Peter 1:18 and 19. He says this, for you know that God paid a ransom to save you from the empty life you inherited from your ancestors. And it was not paid with mere gold or silver, which lose their value. It was the precious blood of Christ, the sinless, spotless Lamb of God. What's the one thing God values most? The one thing God values most is his Son, Jesus Christ. Yet God gave his Son. He sacrificed his Son to save you and me. You know what that means? It means that Jesus' value now determines our value. So I hope that you are hearing what I'm saying. God already determined your value 2,000 years ago when he poured out his wrath upon his Son, Jesus Christ. That's when he declared your worth and your value. If you're wondering just how valuable you are, if you're wondering what you're worth, you are worth the body and blood of the Son of God, Jesus Christ. That's what your value is. And so the good news is your value is no longer determined. Your value doesn't come by you earning it. Your value comes by you freely receiving it from the God of the universe. That's why tonight I'm saying enough with comparison, and I hope you will too, because God is the one who determines my value. I want you to know there's going to be times throughout all of your life where it's going to feel like you're receiving a letter from someone saying, I regret to inform you, you are not enough. But I want you to know that you have a letter from the God of the universe declaring you are enough for me. The God of the universe is declaring to you tonight that you are enough for him. So the question that you need to answer before you leave this place is this: is that truth enough for you?